All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Illinois Green Party series. I am your host, David Rych. As of right now, we have Ed W. Hanna, who's a Green Party member, and he's been on different shows with me before. And a recurring guest here, Max Wilbert, who is, to keep it simple, an environmental activist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about morality versus the law. And I specifically called it versus the law, not morality and the law. Because I think it's kind of just going into the conversation, a given that they are not always the same thing. So that's and the important part is I think that a lot of people think of them as the same thing, at least subconsciously, maybe not by not questioning the concept itself. You hear a lot from people, well, the law is the law and that's it. But then you say, well, slavery was the law. It was like, but they don't know what to say. Jim Crow laws. Rosa Parks sitting at the front of the bus was against the law. So according to your logic, she deserved to get arrested. And I don't think any moral, rational agent would actually say that was okay, morally speaking. Anyway, and then there's always the versus, meaning like which one is more important. Do we have a moral allowance and obligation, say, to stop a cop from using excessive force on somebody, even though it's illegal to do so? Do we have that? Are we morally expected to stop them? That kind of thing. Max, what you do as an environmental activist, clearly you obviously, that's why I wanted you on the show so badly, because what you do is morality versus law, period. So, you're standing up for what's right concerning environmentalism and against environmental policies that are perfectly legal and in place. So yeah, and Ed, I know your temperament and your dispositions, and I know that that you would be a good voice for this chat as well. So hopefully Erin will be able to join us because she's going to come in with a legal perspective. But Max, why don't we start with you, sir? Here she is. All right, hold on. You guys ready? Hold on. Erin?
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry, I have my camera off because I'm finishing up some chores.
Okay, that's cool. Erin Cartwright Weinstein is the Lake County Circuit Court clerk. She's also a lawyer. That's one of the reasons I wanted to have her on the show, is kind of give that legal perspective, since we're talking about the law as well as morality. So we were just about to start off. I just want to introduce you real quick. Erin, this is Ed W. and Max. Guys, that's Erin, though you can't see her.
Hi, yeah, sorry. I'm kind of a hot mess for a second.
All right, so Max is an environmental activist, to say the least, and that's why I wanted him on the show, because like I was just saying, is that what he does day to day is literally morality versus the law. So Max, why don't you go ahead and just kind of kick it off with like what you do, why you do it, which is going to include the content of this topic.
Sure. Well, thanks for having us on, David. And Erin and Ed W. Is that how you say your name?
No, I just say it Ed.
You just say Ed. Okay.
I spell it weird though.
When did the Ed?
Gotcha. Well, it's nice to meet you both. Yeah, and David is right. I am an environmental activist, and I've been an environmental activist since I was pretty young. I just turned 35 the other day.
Happy birthday!
Thank you. The whole time, it's felt like we're fighting against the laws in many cases, and that seems to be the case with all kinds of different movements for justice throughout history. Is that there's an old quote. I probably have it written down here. I'll pull it up. It's something about how when, let's see, I don't know if I'll be able to find it quickly. I should have had this queued up already, but it's something about how whenever human beings have a system of injustice, they will create laws to codify the injustice.
Right.
That's a trend that we see throughout history. It's not like a mistake or an accident. It's actually just a common feature of different human societies, is that when you have injustice, it will be protected in various ways, and the law is one of the ways it will be protected. I'm not someone who's against all laws.
Sure.
There are some laws that I think are great. I think you need some sort of like codes of behavior in any society, whether or not you call them laws or have them written down in a logbook and enforced by a system like what we have now is another question. Right. But just codes of normality or norms is totally fine and good with me. And a lot of the laws that we have in our society are actually really smart. Like, don't speed in the school zone in your car. Like, okay, I don't think anyone can really argue that that's a bad idea.
Right.
But, what we have in addition to these sort of like common sense and moral rules of law is these other rules of law that de facto end up supporting the status quo, which in our society is the status quo of, land theft and slavery that this country was in large part built on, along with, indentured servitude and so on. And this sort of unfettered mercantile capitalism that has developed into this global economic monster that creates these benefits for human beings. Like, you can't deny that the global economy creates these things that people enjoy, that we get some benefit out of. But also, like, I'm on a laptop right now, and this battery in this very laptop probably contains cobalt that was mined by child slaves in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And that's not like an outlier. Like, steel, the biggest iron ore mine in the world, is in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. And it's like thousands of square miles of deforestation, and all these indigenous people getting kicked off their land or having to resort to prostitution to get by, the women, and like diseases spreading in these uncontacted communities, and the local people trying to fight against these giant industrial corporations and failing because the government's on their side, and paramilitary groups and violence. And like, that's mining, that's extraction, that's normal for an empire's economic functioning, and it's protected. So in this country right now, like, if you try and interdict the flow of commerce of things like the batteries that are in this laptop computer, that is illegal for you to do, despite the fact that the production of something like a computer is wrapped up in numerous human rights and environmental abuses that are really atrocious if you're willing to actually examine these supply chains. So, I'm dealing with a situation right now at Thacker Pass, and then I'll shut up because I got a big mouth. Sorry. At Thacker Pass, where we're fighting this mine in northern Nevada, and we've exhausted the legal routes. There have been multiple lawsuits filed by a rancher, multiple tribes, environmental groups, public commenting, democratic engagement, community meetings, nonviolent protests, all these different things. And now it's going forward despite the fact that it's unjust, it's very bad for the land, it's destructive of the Native American sacred site. Almost all the local people are against it. But ultimately, like, the reason that mine is going forward is because a judge has said it's okay to go forward. And that means that if you try and block it, armed men will show up and haul you away if you try and stop them, or commit some sort of act of violence against you if you try and stop it. So, the law sort of often cloaks what is in reality of violence that's underlying a lot of our economic and political system as it exists today.
Absolutely. Well said. Thank you for that. Ed W., you want to chime in, say something? Ed, I don't know why. I always thought the W was pronounced Ed.
It's the word right.
Rich.
WRITE.
Okay.
No, I just started doing that when I was in high school, and I just never stopped.
Okay.
Anyway, I've been working for over 40 years as a paralegal, and I've also had numerous licenses in many professions, and still have. I'm managing broker's license in real estate. Plus, I deal with tax law every day in my other business, and then in my other business, I do, bankruptcies, divorces, lawsuits, letters and stuff like that, debt negotiation for indigent people that can't afford attorneys. I'm not an attorney, but I do it in a document preparation position. And the reason I do it is because I see that where he mentioned a lot of things that are on the macro scale, I look at a lot of things. Not only am I very interested in that area too, but I live and breathe in the micro, where on the personal level. So, like, for example, I don't like the way banks are taking advantage of people, and the courts act like attorneys. And there's no offense to other attorneys because they didn't set it up, but the courts act like attorneys have a monopoly on the law,
right.
And it's not the way it's supposed to be. And I know there is some good reason for it, like when they have clients that are totally incompetent and don't know what they're doing, and they, you got to follow certain legal guidelines. But I've actually had judges tell me on my own cases when I was in court, if you don't have an attorney, I'm going to hold you to the highest standards of an attorney. And I'm like, well, actually, there's Supreme Court cases like Haynes versus Kerner that say that a pro se litigant's pleadings must be liberally construed, which is not the same thing as what you just said. Right. And they just sit back in their chair like, what am I up against? You know? But that's what I believe. You have a right to access the courts. Everyone does. And I've even been involved in a case where I was suing the director of the Department of Insurance, and they get the Attorney General's office appointed to them free, even though they've broken the rules. And in this specific case, the assistant attorney general that was presenting the case didn't submit courtesy copies. And the judge had his standing order out on the desk that said, if anyone doesn't submit courtesy copies within 24 hours of your filing, it said your motion will be stricken and any opposing pleadings that are now unopposed will be granted instanter as in motions of default. And I said that she came up and said, I know it's 4 days after I filed, but I have to present my courtesy copy now. And she hands him a copy. And I said, Your Honor, your standing order says it will be stricken. It doesn't say may be stricken. It says it will be stricken. Well, I'm going to go ahead and hear it. Wait, you said in the beginning that I had to be held to the highest standards of an attorney, but now doesn't the attorney have to be held to the highest standards of a person? No, they get special privileges because they're attorneys, and I said, now are you telling me, and I turned around to the rest of the courtroom and I said, are you telling me that now everybody in this courtroom no longer has to follow your standing order because the attorney doesn't have to? Right. And he said, if you say one more word, I'll throw you in jail for contempt of court.
Yeah. Some of these judges are just crazy people.
It's
go ahead. Sorry. And
it's just, I don't think it's fair the way people, like they took 25 attorneys and they gave them the disclosures on credit card statements. And they said, you're all going to read them. And then we're going to ask you some questions after you're done. And they all read them. And then when they were done, they said, okay, now what did you read? None of them knew. Well, if they don't know, how do you expect non-attorney consumers to know? Right. So everybody's being taken advantage of.
Oh, that's for sure.
And
if I may use that as a segue to Aaron, because I think you're bringing up a very good point on just like on the law side of things and written law. Part of the point of that is to create a unity and consistency throughout the entire legal system so that I can now look it up and say, oh, this says this, I have to do it this way, instead of just making up whatever you want. But oftentimes judges just sort of like, I don't care what it says. I'm a judge. I'm going to go ahead and do what I want. So on that note, Aaron, you were a lawyer for a while. You're now the Lake County Circuit Court clerk, which I know you don't have legal tenets, methods there. I thought you can't make law or policy there, but you certainly see a lot of it. So do you want to kind of just follow up from what Max and Ed said?
That's a tough thing to follow up on. I will say that the majority of the judges are incredible. I mean, we really do. I mean, we've got 42 judges in Lake County, and there's very few that you ever hear things happen where you're like, that was so incredibly inappropriate. So they are human, right? I think I would say our biggest struggle in Lake is just keeping consistency. All of our judges are different. They all have their own subjective and objective, viewpoints. And it's hard for us to get consistency, and my clerks struggle with it because if they have to switch courtrooms and work for another judge, or do or are trying to adjust to a new law, it's always a struggle because nobody ever does anything the same. So it'd be nice, if they created these rules and then they all followed them. But that just doesn't happen. I worked a little bit in Cook and a little bit McHenry, a little DuPage, a little Will. And, I think it's probably pretty similar issue. I mean, this, as circuit clerks, we meet weekly in our zone, which means we're like the Northwest collar counties of Chicago. And we meet every week and talk about stuff that's going on. And I mean, that's a pretty consistent issue that the circuit clerks deal with, depending on, the size of the county. The smaller the county, I think the more the judges kind of connect and work together. When you start getting as large as us, you really struggle to have the judges all really sit down and, follow exactly the same pattern. And then they get into the things that they like, the way that their courtrooms work, the way they think they want things done. And, we don't have a choice but to follow it. So if something doesn't work, I have to go to them and say, hey, this isn't working, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, for the most part, I believe that they really do care, and they really do care about the self-represented litigants. As far as the self-represented litigants go, I mean, the biggest issue right now for people is the cost. And I think that's the first thing I heard mentioned was the expense of court. And it is very expensive. I mean, you get a DUI and you're going to spend $2,500 on your attorney, and then you're going to go spend another $2,500 on your fines and fees. Then you're going to spend more on treatment and more on substance abuse treatment, and more on driving school, and more on attending the victim impact panel. Like, all those things just start to add up, and it's so expensive people can't afford it. I mean, I couldn't afford it, and I don't know how others do. So I think that that's a big issue for the court system, is the financial piece. But when you start getting into that financial piece, then you start getting into everything that's happening within our state government, our federal government, our county government. And like, our county government, I've heard so many times say to me, well, you're not bringing in enough money to fund your office. Well, I'm not a revenue builder. That's
Right.
that's not, I mean, we're a service to the community to help uphold the laws and law and order. We're not a revenue builder. And that has been said to me so many times. I can't even tell you. And so, there are all these pressures, right? And then you have the state, and they do all kinds of different, legislation. And then that legislation gets passed down to the counties, and then the counties have to comply with that legislation, but then the state doesn't fund the changes that they made. So now you've got, for example, the Safety Act, even though that was delayed and we don't know the end result of that yet, that just to Lake County alone was $7.5 million hit annually. So, where does that fall? Does that fall on the taxpayers? Does that fall on the people who are using the judicial system? I mean, who pays for that? I mean, whether we take the money from the federal government or the state or the county or wherever it comes from, it all has to come from taxes eventually. So you end up in this situation of, it's just kind of a spiral, right? And it's a very difficult situation. I will say, I mean, the Supreme Court of Illinois has taken on a group called have created a committee called Access to Justice, and their sole work and goal is how they can make things better for self-represented litigants. And that goes anywhere from trying to create more uniformity in the court systems throughout the state of Illinois, to creating or reducing the cost to people who can't afford to use the system and have a right to be in the system. So they work on all those different pieces, and it's a work in progress. It's a daily work in progress, and it's hard because You go down to Greene County and, you have one clerk, one judge, barely anything, or barely, like they don't have the ability to have the same, well, they don't have the resources to have the same opportunities and options that we have here in Lake County. So we can provide more in Lake County, but then the system runs differently because there's 42 judges to cater to. There's 100.
Yeah, more complex. Yeah.
Right. And so it becomes very difficult, even though you create this access to justice group and they're trying to create uniformity between Greene County and Lake County, so that if you're an SRL or self-represented litigant and you're going to Greene County and you get a traffic ticket there, and then you come up to Lake County and get a traffic ticket here, that everything functions the same, but it's almost impossible to do that. I know nothing technically is impossible, but it's a difficult endeavor, right? So we always have to, work on all of these. We have to keep continuing to work on all of these pieces. And, I think that there's a real effort out there to try and make it better. But there's a lot of, then you've got the Supreme Court doing something, and then the legislators doing something, and then our judges have their standing orders, which are incredibly difficult because every single judge could have a different standing order for their own courtroom. So then you're like, okay, well, this judge wanted this, but now that judge wants that.
Right.
But I do find that, I think everybody's, on a whole, nothing's perfect, but on a whole, I think everyone's trying to make an effort and trying to make a difference. It's just getting all those pieces of the puzzle together, and it's not an easy task.
Right. Well, okay. Well, thanks for that. That's all very true. A couple things I want to point out as somebody who has studied philosophy and logic is that the inconsistencies you're referring to, by the whims of the different judges or whomever it may be, in enforcing and employing the law, applying the law. An inconsistency is the same thing, is another name for a contradiction. A contradiction is the very definition of false. So I understand that it's because of complexity and stuff like that. I mean, I also studied system science, so we dealt with complexity theory all the time. But any system that's inherently contradictory is automatically a false system. And a false system by any rational moral agent shouldn't be trusted. Now, I understand there's probably good parts of it here and there, like Max pointed out. There are certain things about modern day civilization and society and our governments and economics that are quite wonderful. I like my computer, even though I know exactly where the cobalt came from, and upsets me greatly. I play guitar. I like my electric guitar and my amplifier. That kind of thing. But I mean, it's just difficult. So, like, going more to the philosophical side of it, the whole notion of morality versus the law. I had this saying on my radio show, Realities Radio, which Aaron, you were on a couple times, and your husband as well. Where morality always trumps the law. And I have actually made bumper stickers and I sold them and I had them on my cars. Morality always trumps the law, because morality is what is universal to each person. By definition of being a rational moral agent, you automatically have, through moral and rational intuition, access to justice, the concept of it, the truth of it, the reality of it. Nobody, by definition, needs a judicial system to allocate it to us. I don't need a judge to tell me what's right and wrong. I don't need that. I don't need a cop to protect me when I know that I'm being threatened. Okay, that kind of thing. This is the anarchist in me. This is why I think that all governments are a sham. The self-proclaimed, authority over me, screw you. I didn't give you permission to do this to me, and I don't know why you think you have the permission to do it to me, because James Madison scribbled some ink on a piece of parchment and got 55 other white supremacists to sign it. All of a sudden, poof, we all have to obey every word of it. It's absolute nonsense. Anyway, but I understand also that societies are going to organize and they're going to need some sort of like systems of coordination and configuration. I get that. What's that?
Some people, though, will need, like, there are people that are weaker than you,
yes,
that may need protection from society or from bad guys.
I'd be happy to help them.
Or there's people that are, but you're not there. Just like there's not always cops where
That's
you need
part of
help.
the problem.
No, I know, but I'm just saying there's, you still have to have that system to at least help people where you can. or where they are weak or whatever. Yeah, I don't feel like I need the cops to help me either. But there will be a time when I
get
will.
on this later, like the difference between like a status policing and like community policing, like communities providing their own safety nets for their citizens instead of like,
Right.
from federal to state, like, state troopers driving around doing mostly nothing all day. And all the money that we spend on them militarized. Anyway, whatever. I don't want to go on the police. I'm tired of talking about the cops. I just on the philosophical notion of everything I just said, and I mean, because like I know philosophically, if somebody doesn't believe in like free will, everything I just said, it goes away, right? If you are not an individual person that gets to make your own choices via reason or intuition or emotion, then there's no point in advocating for any sort of like individual liberty or right to self-determination. Max, what do you think about that?
My brain shuts down as soon as the philosophy starts coming out, to tell the truth. But I do want to respond to something that Aaron said.
Okay.
And maybe it'll dovetail into the point that you're making, David. Aaron was saying that, talking about how people are doing the best they can to within the system to improve it and to work on these things. And I want to like notice that and applaud that. And I think that's always been the case. I think you're right, David, that like human beings have a strong sense of right and wrong, as social animals, as one of the species of chimpanzees, as primatologists will talk about humans, as we are one of the chimpanzee species.
Right.
Like other social animals, we like have a developed sense of right and wrong. And when people hoard things and don't share or are really mean to each other or something like that, most of us like see that as wrong and want to rectify that situation in some way. And I think that's a beautiful thing. It's a wonderful thing. It's also like, it's ponderous, we live in a ponderous, slow to change society, which I don't know that I have the answer to that necessarily. It's the reality in living in a world of 8 billion people rather than sort of the ancestral tribal societies that humans lived in for 95% of our existence on this planet, where it was like a human scale society, where if somebody's being an asshole, like we're gonna get together with our friends and family and like deal with the situation face to face in one way or another.
I heard the neighbor next door is like beating the hell out of his children. We're not going to have that. We're going to go confront him.
Right. And now we have like all these layers of abstraction. I'm just describing the reality, describing the problem. I'm not particularly brilliant. Like, here's the great solution to get us out of this.
That's very difficult.
But it's ponderous to change.
I love that word, ponderous.
That's
I'm going to
really
put that
hard.
into my vernacular. And
I'm thinking about like, slavery, like stopping slavery required, 100 years of abolitionist activism that slowly morphed into guerrilla warfare that became the bloodiest war in the nation's history, that then ended the institution of slavery legally, but then it morphed into Jim Crow, and the legacy of that is still living on in wealth disparities and all these different health outcomes and all these different issues, right, that go on to this day. Which is just to say, again, that change is ponderous and slow and difficult in the system that we live in right now. And that becomes a big challenge, one, if you're like really facing the difficulty of that yourself, like if you're under the heel of the system in some way. I think our legal system by and large is like far better today on a lot of human rights issues than it was 50 years ago, and clearly than it was 100 years ago or something like that. And yet me working as an environmental activist, that's one area where I see we have not caught up really in any way. We don't have the rights of nature are not recognized in the legal system in any way, and that is like leading us rapidly into this building and expanding catastrophe that our system seems unable to grapple with in a lot of ways. And that there are some like legal avenues. Some people are working on rights of nature stuff, really challenging to do because that's sort of against some of the fundamental tenets of, of property law in this country, like going back to English common law, there are people who are working on things like the necessity defense for climate activists who break the law, and they're likening it to, you break somebody's door down to go save them because their house is on fire. Like, you're not going to get charged with destroying their property for breaking their door down because you were doing it for a higher good. Activists have been trying to use that defense, and lawyers have been trying to use that defense after shutting down pipelines and doing different types of actions to defend the planet, and successfully in a few cases where some brave judges and prosecutors have been lenient or seen the necessity for this change in the legal system. Necessity, no pun intended. But it's slow too, so we need more like brave and forward-thinking people in the legal system to recognize that, like, in order for there to be precedent, in order for there to be changes, we need people working at all levels of society. Like, I don't really expect our legislative system to come up with some great solutions to global warming and biodiversity crisis and extinction and all these different issues. But, like, every law that's passed in that direction is great. Every new wilderness area is something we really need right now. And I think we need people working at every level and pushing.
There are a multitude of fronts to fight on, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so I want to make sure I give each of you like fair amount of time, but I want to kind of ask the question right now, and I'm going to start with Aaron, because you're explicitly in the law. What would you define as a right? What is a right?
Well, you have the right to due process. Like, you have.
That's an example of a right.
Right. So
okay, go ahead,
I know I'm kind of moving. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
You're getting me talking in my head and then saying it out loud. So I mean, it means that the courts, if you're looking at it from a court perspective, have an obligation to allow you to have what is provided in the law as a right. So if it's due process, then the court has to allow you that due process, which means when you come to court, you have the right to have a trial. Whether you choose to take that right or not, you have the right to have it, and it can't be denied to you.
Right. Okay. Very, very well said. Ed, what would you say?
That basically, I was just going to say the one sentence that she ended with is just a right is something that you can't be denied.
It's inherent.
Right. You
okay.
can't.
As I was saying earlier, like this, by
can't be taken from
you. You have access to justice and virtues yourself.
Right. And our system, even as a whole, it used to be a lot better until money got involved. In other words, like, for example, criminal justice system. It was one of the best in the world in America. And then when we started doing the get tough laws and the privatized prisons and stuff like that, they don't provide anything better for less. They can say, oh, businesses are more economical or more competitive. They are sometimes, and they're not sometimes.
Sometimes, right, exactly.
In areas where they're involved with the government, they're less competitive.
Right.
And if you look at the system, what happened is in order to make that system, get tough, they had to increase sentences. Then that meant that more people were locked up for longer. And now where are you going to get the money for that? And what wound up happening is they took money out of the mental health department. And then all those people wound up on the street. And then where are they going to go when they're not all the way right upstairs? Half of them became homeless and the other half committed crimes. Right. And now they're in the, prison system. Right. You have to be more people oriented and less dollar oriented when it comes to certain things. Like, for example, even like the talk we had on Medicare for All, same thing. They have more in the top 10 systems. They have more for half the money. They pay $5,500 per person per year, and they have ranked in the top 10. We're ranked 37th, and we pay $11,509 per person per year. Wow. Everything does, just like the post office. It doesn't have to be for profit. Grandma can now get her letter in the middle of Iowa for the same 63 cents as you can send a letter to your neighbor 2 blocks down.
Right.
And that's okay, because grandma should get those letters. We don't have to be charged $13 for FedEx to bring her that letter, or they would probably charge more because it's out in the country. And I understand that, but there's certain areas that are not meant to be for profit, you know.
Oh, I know 100%. Yeah, there's an argument that actually none of it should be. But anyway, depends on how you define profit. But also, so in my research and studying ethics and epistemology is that a right. I mean, if you go to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, if you ask an ethicist or a philosopher, a moralist, what is a right? Is a moral allowance for behavior. A right is a right because it's right thing to do. Nobody has the right to be wrong. You have the ability to. You don't have the right to. I have the ability to murder somebody. I do not have the right to do that. Two totally different things. That being said, and going back to the rational moral agency of an individual person, and the fact that you can epistemologically access any of these concepts, these virtues, these values, justice, liberty, goodness, beauty, knowledge, truth, all this the typical kind of philosophical stuff. You can do that on your own, just by education and contemplation, and you can apply it as a rational human being. The notion that like we have in this country, or in most countries, that the government is, I think most people think of a right as that which a government allocates to you. Like, I'm going to give you this right to do this. Well, no, you're not giving me anything. I already have it. It's not yours to give. Now, any government worth a shit will protect your right to live in a good way and fight off any external forces trying to suppress your ability to do that. But oftentimes we see like, well, the judge says you have the right to do this. Well, the judge doesn't allocate rights. It's ridiculous. Well, I guess I'm going to have to go back to the police. You hear that a lot with the police. Well, they have special rights. There's no such thing as a special right. If a right is a moral allowance for behavior, then morals apply to each and every one of us equally. Okay, so by the definition of it being a right, like if you have the right to do X, by definition of it being a right, everybody has the right to do X.
Well, you do have the right to make a citizen's arrest just like a cop.
Well, no, I don't have the right. and even if it's written down somewhere, hardly, I would like to see some examples of that actually being protected. Okay, for example, I had Eric Reinhardt, and I like Eric Reinhardt. Aaron, I just want you to know that I love Eric Reinhardt. But like we were talking about, how you have to go along with an illegal arrest, even if you know it's illegal. That's ridiculous. Yeah, I know that I didn't do anything wrong, but I get to you get to shackle me in chains and put me in a cage. I don't think so. There's nothing morally acceptable about that.
But everyone denies that they committed a crime, correct?
No, I know, and so that's why I'm being very specific. I know I didn't do it. I'm not saying that if you did it, you're denying it. And how does a cop tell the difference? I don't know. There's certainly some practical limitations on what I'm espousing here, and there's no doubt. Okay, no doubt. We can have that conversation.
Well, usually they're not going to make an arrest right away anyway, unless it's the crime that you did was heinous or egregious or very serious. For example, if you steal something, a lot of times they'll just come up to you and start talking to you and say, "Can you come with us?" or whatever. "Can you get in the car?" or whatever. They're not going to slap the chains on you. Now, if you're being accused of murder and you're on a video that you did it, even though I haven't taken you to trial yet, well, I'm sorry, I do get to arrest you in that case there because you are a possible hazard to other people. Yeah. That's actually the reason why our courts were even really set up. Because in the old days, I could just shoot you, and they didn't want people to take the law into their own hands, so they decided to make up a judicial system. So now you don't have to do that. You can get the same rights as the strong guy, the guy who is the bully in town, and if it works properly, we all could use that. That doesn't hurt us, That's the whole thing is like does it always work that way. Like I'll have one jurisdiction. We'll do a bankruptcy for somebody in one jurisdiction, and they'll tell us that on the sheet that holds the exemptions, we can't put those codes in, or those statutes in, because if we do that, we're practicing law without a license. And I'm like, no, the program did it. We don't care. Okay, fine. We cut them out. We literally take scissors, cut them out, and then make another copy of that page. And then in another jurisdiction, they'll tell us this is done inappropriate, so we're not going to allow it. You have to change this and put those statutes in. I'm like, wait a minute. Well, this other jurisdiction told us we don't have to. Well, you do have to. I said, okay, I'll tell you what. I'll put them in. You just type me up a letter saying that I'm supposed to put them in. Well, no, we can leave that alone then. Don't worry about it. Yeah, because you don't want to put it in writing that I can do it. It happens over and over and over again, though, just because we're all individuals and everybody, we don't have a consistent system. That's what we could really use, a more consistent system. And to have that, you'd have to have maybe some less rules so that it can be more generalized for people. And judges, really, that's where the term judge came from, can take basic laws and then, make little changes based on individual circumstances. Because I used to read cases, precedent law, when I first became a paralegal, and I'd listen to the case and I'd be like, oh, that guy's in trouble. And then I'd hear the rebuttal, and I'd be like, oh, wait a minute, he's the bad guy. And then I'd hear the sir rebuttal. I'm like, oh, he was twisting the truth. There's so many minute details that can change things that's why all of a sudden I became where I take everything so literal. So and that's how you can tell a lot of the times when the big wigs, like the Faucis or whatever, are lying, because you can tell by the words they're using, they're so careful to not say it in a way that now they can be held to it.
That they can be checked. Right, exactly. Max, I know you need to probably take off in a little bit here before the end of the show. So I want to talking about again, moral value as being the definition of a right, and that literally everything, just by existing, you have a certain value. You can't exist and have zero value. It doesn't make any metaphysical sense, mathematical or moral value. So there's, and within yourself, to the ecosystems you belong to other species, to people in specific, if you want to do that thing, trees are beautiful, and they give people shade and pleasure and coolness and a place to sit down and have wonderful conversation, and they're beautiful to look at. And they also do 1,000 other things for the ecosystem surrounding them. So automatically nature has to have value. It can't be existing as nature and not have value. That's ridiculous. So that's why I would say, as an environmentalist, that nature very much has rights, because a right is a moral allowance. Do you see where I'm going?
Yeah, well, I do, and I'm gonna respond in a sort of roundabout way. I do have to leave here in a couple minutes, so I'll try and be short. And I'll say up front, it's been a pleasure to hear from you, Aaron and Ed and David. Good to see you as always. We have a certain legal and moral and philosophical cultural framework in this country that really emerges from, England and Western Europe and this sort of Protestant ethic coming out of the Enlightenment, and there's some good that came of that, but it's also a very culturally blinkered perspective. And I feel like so many of these discussions don't question some of those fundamental underlying things. Like when the first, colonists showed up on this continent from Europe, they established a country where you had the right to free speech. Eventually you had the right to due process. You had the right to do what you want on your private property. You had the right to own private property in the first place, right? But we also have the right to buy a massive private yacht or a jet and fly all over the planet. The right to buy a laptop or a car or a cell phone or cheap plastic toys that are made as a result of chains of ecocide and often exploitation of labor and human beings. Things like the right to have as many kids as you want, to buy a really big car, to accumulate all the wealth that you want. You know, these are some of the rights that we have in practice. And so I really think it's valuable to flip that around, because there are sort of other moral frameworks than rights to look at
That is true.
how to live. And I like to flip it from rights to responsibilities.
There you go. Thank
Not
you.
to ignore, you know, human rights and free speech and like these things that emerge out of our liberal Western tradition that have a lot of value and that I think we should hang on to at all costs and exercise and protect. But also like that individualistic perspective of rights is so different from a communal perspective of responsibilities, where you can say, okay, I may have the right to do whatever I want on my private property. Like I have the right to cut down all the trees where I live, you know, and turn them into lumber or sell them to a logging company or something. But what are my responsibilities here? You know, and that to me is a much more interesting and challenging question. And I think is something that I would like to see more of in our society. And I don't really know how to get there. Again, I feel like I've just come on the show to talk about the things that I see issues with, and I don't have all the answers, but
I don't know anybody that does, and I always appreciate having you on the show because you have a great amount of insight and things worth listening to. But I would say that like a moral allowance automatically comes with responsibility and accountability. By being a moral agent, you're responsible for your behavior. And you're also there, if you're responsible, you're accountable to any other moral agent, I guess. That's what I would say. But you're right. I mean, the word rights is kind of a culturally loaded, if you will. All right, Max, thank you so much. I'll take it. Keep it up, buddy.
Max,
Take it easy.
Max, you were fascinating. It was nice to sort of meet you virtually.
Yeah, let's do it again. I'll talk to y'all soon.
I'll be in touch. Take care.
Take care.
All right, Aaron, you're sitting there patiently. Go ahead. You're the lawyer. What do you think about all this stuff that we've been saying?
So I just wanted to add that I thought a couple of things that he said were really fascinating. I think one of them he said earlier where he was talking about how the government just doesn't change fast enough. And that's absolutely 110% true. And then he's talking about rights versus responsibilities. And when you really think about it, our U.S. Constitution and our state of Illinois Constitution are so incredibly old that they really haven't molded to what has become important issues today.
Right.
If, I mean, back then, guns were used for hunting and were incredibly important, and we lived a whole different lifestyle with the use of guns than we see today, right? So,
yes.
And I think now the changes in the environment and those types of things, had they been an issue back when they wrote the Constitution, they probably would have had something in there protecting our land. And, those are I thought that was really interesting that he brought those two different things up in two different segments of conversation, but they really interlock.
Yeah.
And are really important.
Yeah, for sure. There is a lady who's been on the show several times, Mary Von Rossum, who had founded the Delaware River Project, who is a lawyer who goes around and tries to get states to amend their constitutions that include the right to a clean and healthy environment, basically. And she's actually succeeded. I know in Maine, I feel like there's two more, I can't remember, where it's in the Constitution that like these citizens have a right to a healthy and clean environment. You don't get to pollute it legally. And it comes state down. It's not local. It's not municipal. It's not like that. And, of course, her big target is the federal government. One of the beauties, and I point my finger at the forefathers a lot because I still think they were kind of weird people. But the U.S. Constitution was like a masterpiece in a lot of ways, and really really forwarded a movement of individual liberties that was almost completely unheard of before then, almost completely. everything was very tribal and cultural based, and the idea of like you as an individual get to make your own choices and dress the way you want to and think the way you want to and do what you want was just absurd. A lot of the religions, want collectivism and that kind of thing, and everybody needs to do the same thing at the same time. So there's that. Now, obviously, there was problems like with slavery and the Federalists versus the Democratic Republicans, and the 3/5 clause in Article 2. That's nuts. But the beauty and the power of the American Constitution is that it can be amended, is that it can change over time with new thinking, with new reasoning, with new obstacles and problems to be solved. It can be amended.
Well, it can be, but it does require a vote.
Oh, 2/3 of the states have to do it, and there's all sorts of crap you got to go through to get to that point. It's very difficult. There's no doubt. But I'm just saying that that's a perk. Is that like it's not a static? That's why I can't stand some of these judges who think it's like not a living. By a living document, all that means is that it can change. It doesn't mean it's breathing and eating and metabolizing food. So anyway, we really got a couple minutes left. So I want to give Aaron the last word. So Ed, why don't you go ahead and kind of give us a piece of your mind here?
Well, morals is a step above the law. In other words, according to the law, I can call you names. But according to morals, or even along those same lines, ethics, it's kind of not right for me to do that.
Right.
Well, it all boils down to, and all the law does too, it boils down to something called mens rea, which is our intent. What do you intend to do? And as long as what you intend to do is good, you should be left alone. If you're intending to do something wrong, well, then maybe you're not mature enough to, interact with society without some form of supervision. And that's where it should be, literally fall into that groove right there. And then we won't have to worry about you're getting in my way, or am I getting in your way, or whatever. If we don't have to, we got to act more like adults. And adults don't need babysitters.
I agree, but now I'm thinking about, and Aaron, I wanted you to have last word just because of your legal background. But like nowadays, it's almost impossible to get going everything that I'm espousing for, here on the show tonight. There's nuclear weapons, and there's tyrannical governments, and there's crazy terrorists, and there's all sorts of hackers out there who could like take down an entire, county's electric grid like that. The individual people, even with the greatest moral impetus, can't attend to. There's sex trafficking, and there's child trafficking, and there's still slavery in some areas of the country that I don't know how to deal with that. I can't deal with that crap. So we almost need like this greater, system to tend to these sort of things. All right. Anyway, what do you think, Aaron? Do you think we should just like, abolish the government, start a morally based anarchistic society?
In my personal opinion, absolutely not.
Okay. No, I'm being.
You nonconformist.
Yes, exactly. Well, no, that's very true. I've never been a conformist. I've always been very anti-culture. No, go. But if you just want to kind of like give us your kind of summation of like morality and the law or whatever else.
No, I think the part of the issue is that the way that the government is designed is that every single one of us has slightly different morals, right? Different things we believe in, different ways we grew up, different subjective and objective views. Not one of us is going to sit down and see something exactly the same way. And I think that the government is set up to say that there's certain things that need to be protected. And from those certain things that need to be protected, we have the police, we have judges, we have a judicial system. And I think that's what we use to protect ourselves and protect our society, and to protect ourselves from people like Trump, or because I know how you feel about Trump, so I can say that one. We agree on that. But there are things that have to be protected, and there are people, if you're not held accountable, you do whatever you want to do. And you know, if you don't want someone to, you know, if you don't want, you know, your congressperson to steal, and you don't want, you know, your president to toss classified documents all over the place, then we have to have an accountability system, and the judicial system is set up for that.
Right.
And is it perfect? Oh my God, it's not perfect. It's not anywhere near perfect, but we have to have something, and we definitely need change. I mean, I am beyond appalled by everything that's happening with all of the, you know, the weapons bans and everything else that's happening. And we just, you know, and we need to find a way to allow the Second Amendment to exist, but for everyone to feel safe when they walk in the grocery store. And that is a very, very complicated and difficult thing, because you have everyone with all their different morals jumping into the pot and fighting, and we have to find a way through that. And it's definitely not easy. I don't see a perfect solution in my own mind, and I'm kind of a problem solver. I liked coming into my office where there were issues and things to fix, and I got to sit down and work on them and fix them, and the day-to-day stuff I have to fix. I enjoy that. That's what I love to do. And I think that's, you know, I don't see a perfect fix. Sorry, I just got home and now my dogs are barking. But I can say that the design of our system has a point and has a reason, and its goal, whether perfect or not, is to provide accountability. And that's whether we, you know, we have, it's a very difficult discussion to have about morals in the law, because everybody's got their own feelings, their own morals, the way they grew up. I mean, and it's, you know, for example, the, you know, just even divorce law just recently turned dogs into property. So, you know, and made an adjustment from not even considering them at all, and people fighting over them with no basis in law to be able to make any determinations on it, to turning around and putting in the statute that dogs are now, you know, law, and something that the courts could address. And it's, you know, so it's just a very, very, what you've brought forward is a very tricky question and a very difficult issue, because everybody feels so differently, and our world is constantly changing, and we're constantly having new issues. And I wish I had like a better answer, you know.
That's perfect. No, you're saying everything right. And that's why I brought up the issue, is because, well, you know, again, as a philosopher, this is something I think about a lot. You know, morality. Like, to me, it's just like, you know, not that I was like this wonderful morally virtuous person, you know, my whole life, but, you know, I've definitely become a lot better at it. When I was a kid, I was a total dick. But
now my dogs are fighting. We're talking about this. My dog just got in a fight. Okay,
yeah, and you know, but I like nowadays, like, I'm like, what do you mean you didn't know that was what you just did was wrong? Like, how did that not occur to you? That's crazy, you know, like whatever there may be. I can't think of an example, but some of the difficulty, the tension, again, it comes from, like, I do researching on police every single day for over 3 years, and I see things, and I understand it's not the majority by even close. But I still see things, and I'm like, why, how is that allowable? Like, morally speaking, how the hell are we as a society allowing them to do this to us? I don't get that. Anyway, we can talk about
and sometimes, but then you've got Sheriff Eidelberg, who ran into the middle of the mass shooting in Highland Park to help save people.
I know, John. Yeah, no, John's a fan.
Yeah, no. I know you know him.
Chris Cavelli, wonderful human being.
And Cavelli is amazing.
Yeah, he really is.
I mean, oh my God. And to work with, by the way, on a daily basis, he is incredible.
Yeah. It's good.
I mean, we are so blessed to have him here. Yeah, no, I mean, I hope we don't lose him, because everybody else wants him.
Yeah, I mean, every once in a while, I'll text Chris. I'm like, hey, what about this and that? And he's always very accessible. He's a wonderful human being.
Oh, he's amazing.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're though. Ed, I'm sorry. Did you want to say something real quick? You sound like you did.
No, that's all right.
Okay, cool. Aaron, thank you so much for coming on the show. I always enjoy talking to you. Ed, it's been a minute, like I said, but I always enjoy talking to you as well. I asked you both on specifically because of your temperaments and dispositions, intellectually, morally, legally, that kind of thing. Aaron, I know that you would have a lot of insight because I think I had forgotten that you were a paralegal ed. So that was very cool too. And Max, in case you're wondering or watching, thanks again for coming on because you are an amazing human being. This guy, like he's getting himself in right there.
Yeah, where is he from?
He's, I believe, Southern Oregon or Northern California or both.
Okay.
This guy is the guy who like he sat like for a week on top of an excavator so that they couldn't move it. He's the guy who chains himself. Like he's that guy.
Oh wow.
Because he's awesome. As we're sitting here discussing certain things, he's literally out there doing it. So not that what we do isn't important, because of course it is. So thank you again for coming on the show, guys. Appreciate it. Aaron, we need to have dinner sometime soon.
Absolutely. Are you still here?
I think I'm actually going to stay here for a little while too.
Ooh, cool.
I feel like if the world's going to end, we're going to know by next year. So I'm going to wait till next year before I start investing any money. And even though that sounds funny, I can explain that later. Anyway, so has to do with the global.
Nice to meet you, Ed.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, thank you everybody for tuning in to the Green Party Series. I'm your host, David Rich. Till next time, be good, be green.
Have a good one.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.